when we keep all this stuff because of the past, it's preventing us from being all that God intended us to be. I believe that all of us were created for very specific, very unique things that only we can do. There is literally no one else created to do exactly what we were created to do. And our legacy is doing that. And by hanging on to the clutter of the past, we are holding ourselves back, and we're denying the world of the blessing that we would give them by enabling them. So our Productive Environment Institute says, accomplish your work and enjoy your life and enable others to do the same. Because when you're accomplishing your work and enjoying your life, you are enabling other people. You're being a role model to people. You're helping people that desperately need your help. And one of the values of our company is together we are better.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Barbara Hemphill with us. Barbara is the founder of Productive Environment Institute. She's passionate about helping entrepreneurs eliminate clutter and accelerate their vision to leave a legacy that matters. Her book, Taming the Paper Tiger, helped her launch and grow the organizing industry. A team of certified productive environment specialists delivers her world-class expertise virtually. Barbara, it's so great to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you, Stephan. I'm so happy. When I saw Get Yourself Optimized, it just makes my heart sing because optimize is one of my favorite words.
And why is that?
Well, we have in Productive Environment Institute a 7-step process that we take people through over a long period of time, like a year, that looks at all. And there's 7 steps, and it's from going from overwhelmed to optimized.
Nice. Well, I love being optimized. So
I just
awesome.
realized I said 7 steps. It's not 7, it's 9. It's a numbers thing.
9, right. So that takes an entire year to go through that process, huh?
That's like literally changing everything. I mean, really, it's time, space, information, and especially developing the habits, because so much of it, we put in a system first. So we have boot camps that we offer, and the boot camps are 4 and 5 weeks long. And at the end, we have one called Office Transformation Boot Camp, which deals with the paper and the physical stuff in your office. And then we have a digital boot camp transportation, which deals with email and digital documents. Those are much, much shorter. And the key is at the end of that time, you have put in place a system to stop the problem. We're all about not dealing with the backlog. And we use the acronym SYSTEM, saving you space, time, energy, and money. Every time you have to do something repeatedly, whether it's exercise or file your taxes, you need a system. And so we help the client put in a system, and it's not our system. We actually get David Allen and Marie Kondo dropouts because both of them have systems and they work. They absolutely work. But some people, we had one prospect say, I tried Marie Kondo, and at the end of 2 months, I said, if this is what has to happen, there's no hope for me. So when people say to me, what should I do? We always say that's the wrong question. The question is, what will you do? Because organizing is an art form. And if your vision is big enough, and you have to have a why. I mean, one of the questions we ask is on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to change this? And if it isn't 9 or 10, it's probably not going to high enough to do it. But if it's a 9 or a 10, then we can always get there by, and our certified productive environment specialists all have kind of different ways that they work. So sometimes clients work with more than one, or they work with one to do one part of what they're doing and another one to do another part. So it's lots of fun. I mean, I'm 77 years old. I've been doing this for 46 years, and people keep saying, when are you going to retire? I said, retirement is not in my brain. My mother was 82 and working full time because she wanted to, and I'm the same. God didn't create any two people or any two organizations the same. So every day is new and exciting.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, you're an inspiration. I want to touch on a few things that you said and go a little bit deeper on them. So one of you said the wrong question is involving should, and really it's about what will I do? And that reminded me of something I learned from a program, a methodology called nonviolent communication, NVC.
I've taken
Marshall
it.
Rosenberg.
I love that program. That is fantastic.
Yes. Well, Marshall always said that should is the most violent word in the English language, and not to should all over yourself.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring up because I totally resonated with what you were saying. And the other thing was you mentioned David Allen, and I was going to bring him up because one of the most transformational things I learned from David Allen, and I took his Getting Things Done GTD workshop as well as reading his book. He spoke about something that just was so powerful for me. He called it the demilitarized zone, or DMZ. And I don't think there's much information about this online. I actually just searched for it. I don't know, it just popped in my head just like 2 days ago. And the only thing I could find was my interview of him where I asked him to reiterate it. And then I think there might have been one blog post or something that he mentioned it. The DMZ is where you drag all of that email or all of your to-dos or your inbox or whatever, your digital backlog. And then you start from fresh, filing things, trying to get caught up, which, as you alluded to, is just a losing proposition. You start with a DMZ folder, clear everything into that and out of the inbox, and then you're starting from fresh. And that was a lifesaver.
Yeah, absolutely. We call it bankruptcy. So the way we use that same, but we call it email bankruptcy or digital bankruptcy. And one of the principles that I came up with almost 40 years ago, was one of the very early things, was today's mail is tomorrow's pile. And so research shows that 80% of what we keep, we never use. And actually, Perry Marshall, one of my coaches, says, we've talked for years about the 80-20 principle. But in his experience, he said now it's almost like 95-5, that the amount that makes a difference is getting smaller as we get more information. And that's been my experience as well. So when we have 2 boot camps. One is called Office Transformation Boot Camp, which is to help people clear their paper and their physical stuff in their office, and then Digital Boot Camp. And in both cases, we start with, okay, we're going to ignore everything you did in the past. And at the end of this program, we guarantee 3 things. One is that you will know what to do with every new piece of information that's come in. So we've stopped the problem. Then 2, that everything that you have filed in the time we've been actively working together, you or anyone else you want to can find it in a matter of seconds. And then 3, that you will leave the program with a game plan to how to fix the rest. Because if this has been piling up, and I have to say, Stephan, that most of our clients are 40 plus. They're people who have been in business a long time. They're very intelligent. They're very interested in things. They've accumulated notebooks and training materials and notes and course materials and stuff like that. So there's a lot. And obviously you're not going to fix that quickly. But because research shows that most of it you're never going to use anyway, you stop the problem. Then as you need to have something from the old, you bring it into the new. And then over time, you'll be able to figure out whether you need it. So one of my favorite stories, I was working with a large association. I was in Washington, D.C. for about 15 years, and I had organized the filing system for a large association, and they had lots and lots of reference files. We use the term action file versus reference. Action means I'm actively working on it. This is my project. And reference means I don't have the guts to throw it away. It's like, you probably won't need it. Well, I knew that we were spending hours filing things that nobody was ever going to use, but the executive director didn't believe me. So I went and put $1 bills in all the files. And I went back later, went back a year later and opened them up, and all the $1 bills were still there. So they say you can't change what you don't measure. Well, that was a way to measure it.
Yeah, that's funny. I actually organize my email by having an action file or folder and a read review folder and an archive, which is essentially my reference folder where I can search, and I might occasionally go and do a search, but for the most part, I live in my action folder, and the read review is just kind of I check that every so often because those are more FYIs, and I've been CC'd on something and someone else meant to handle it. I'm just being kept in the loop. And that saves me so much, what Cal Newport refers to as attention residue. Because if I'm just checking my email constantly and then going into meetings or trying to work on big projects or get into deep work mode, part of my brain is still occupied by those emails I was checking or the text messages that I happened to glance at before I got into that deep work state. And it really messes you up. And it's, I don't know, like 25 minutes, I think is the average. That bit of information sticks in your head, occupying space and distracting you from where you wanted to focus. So yeah. By the way, I have an assistant who goes into my inbox and keeps it at inbox 0 so that I only have to go into my action file and not into my inbox, which is just
absolutely. It's one of the very, very best things you could do. Well, my company's been built on 4 words. Clutter is postponed decisions. I learned that originally because I started the residential organizing industry. It didn't exist when I started. It was a situation. I lived in India for almost 5 years and adopted 3 orphan children. And we moved back to New York City, and my husband worked for a nonprofit and didn't make enough money to pay to live in New York. So it was like I needed to bring in income to the family, but I wanted my children to be first. So I decided the best way to do that was to find a problem in the world that I could solve that people would pay me for. So I sat on the playground and I would just listen to people talking. And I began to hear people talking about clutter and disorganization and time management and things like that. And I thought, they didn't have my parents, because I grew up on a farm in Nebraska. My father was a farmer. Well, when you're a farmer, you have to have systems. I mean, if you don't have any crops. And, they had dairy cattle and, you had to have ways to take care of them. And my mother was the assistant to the owner of a bank for 46 years. So, and they used to win lots of awards because they had all kinds of systems in place. So I just grew up with that, and I thought everybody did. And then I realized, oh no, there's a lot of people that didn't have my mother and my father, and there's no place that we get taught how to be organized. So if you're not naturally organized and you don't hire somebody to help you or have somebody to role model it, it's very difficult. I mean, I can't tell you. I remember working with a pediatric surgeon, and we were organizing his to read pile. He had piles of medical journals, these important articles. And I said, well, the problem is first of all, they're in a pile. So every day you look at them, you're feeling guilty because you haven't read them. So that's draining energy. Secondly, you don't have them when you need them. So we created what we called a just-in-time reading system. Now we would do this digitally, but back then it was paper. So we went through the journals. He would tear out the 2 or 3 articles that he was really interested in. But the problem is, if you read them, but you're not implementing them at the moment, then you forget. So we would tear them out, and we created a just-in-time, we don't use the term filing system, we use finding system. So we created a finding system where he could file those articles so that when he was getting ready to do surgery on that particular thing, he could find it, have it immediately. And he looked at me and he said, they didn't teach me this in medical school. And yet it's so important because it really separated him as someone who really was on top of what was going on.
Yeah, that's really an important thing to point out, that you don't learn this stuff in medical school, law school, any kind of university, or in high school. You just kind of left to your own devices, all the practical stuff about how to balance your budget and how to maintain focus and traction, how to be entrepreneurial. None of that's taught in school.
That's true. And we're seeing in our culture what it's doing to our culture. I mean, our culture is spending a lot of time learning things that aren't really making any difference. And it really is very, very sad. But by the same token, as entrepreneurs, it's a huge opportunity. And one of the things that I've seen is that COVID has opened up in our industry some opportunities we never had before. Because, first of all, we were one of the first organizing consultants to do virtual organizing before anybody did it. So during COVID, when everybody was at home and in many cases reorganizing their house, because there used to be one person working from home and now there's two people working from home, and then the kids came home and we're trying to work too. And so we could help them organize their home offices in a way that no one else was able to offer it. But for years, I tried to market to companies because I knew from the experience I'd had, because I lived in New York for a while, I did some really big companies, not a lot, but a few, enough to help me understand what the problem was. But when I would try to market to companies, they saw it as an expense, not an investment. And part of the reason was they had no idea how much difficulty employees were having with organization, because they would ask an employee for something and they would get it. What they didn't know was that 4 employees spent 20 minutes looking for it. And just recently what happened now with COVID, so there's downsizing, right? So there was a client who had 18 employees. They decided to get rid of the building. They all decided they liked working at home. They were working at home. And so the owner said to the employees, okay, take everything home. And he went back in. It took 2 days to eliminate all the clutter that was left behind. So one of the services that we offer, which is absolutely my most favorite, is called a Productive Environment Day. And it's an event that we do for a group of people that share a physical space. They share physical information and digital information. And we set up recycling and shredding and something called Trash to Treasure, which is where you can put, personal flower vases and books and things like that. And then one of the key things is a staging area. And that's like, this is in my office. I don't need it, but I don't know what to do with it. And so we bring in food in the morning. And then while they're eating, do a seminar called Sometimes It Takes an Expert to Take Out the Trash. And we teach them how to make decisions about what they really need to keep. And then we give prizes for the funniest thing, the oldest thing, the most valuable thing, the most worthless thing. And with the Trash to Treasure, anybody can go in during the day and take anything they want. So there's some fun, some energy that happens. And my mother used to say, many hands make light work. And at first people are, I don't want to do this. But then they realize that I feel better. I feel better when I get rid of this stuff. So I did it with a company with 400 employees and we did 12 days. They shredded alone 33,000 pounds of paper and deleted almost 1/2 of the files on their server. And the IT people were getting ready to change servers. So they were thrilled because they only had half as much to move. So it makes the biggest impact on the greatest number of people in the shortest amount of time of anything that we've ever done. And it's all based on clutter's postponed decisions and empowering people to make decisions. And the key is that management has to participate, because management has to be the role model to show that often they do their offices first. I just worked with an attorney who'd been in business 45 years. Because one of the things that's happening now is there's a lot of companies where they have gone paperless, but they haven't dealt with the paper before they were paperless. And that was the case with him. So, I had like 3 decades of paper. And nobody goes to work and says, I'm going to clean out the files today. And in fact, the owner wouldn't have done it if I hadn't been there, saying, okay, let's get back to this. And at the end of the day, he was just amazed. He said, I cannot believe how much we've accomplished in one day.
Right. And it also is very freeing energetically. There's a spiritual and emotional uplifting that happens by decluttering and simplifying and getting things organized.
Well, the book I wrote, Less Clutter, More Life, the premise of it is that physical and digital clutter is a symptom of emotional and spiritual clutter. I have seen that over and over. I mean, I learned it years ago. I was autographing. Taming the Paper Tiger was the first book I wrote. I wrote it because when I started doing residences in New York in 1979, I quickly learned the number one challenge was paper. We could do the closets and the cupboards in the garage, but paper was really hard and still is, because It's not the paper, it's what it represents. Your hopes, your dreams, your fears, your intentions, your expectations. And dealing with that brings up all kinds of emotion. So we don't want to. Well, I was autographing Taming the Paper Tiger at Barnes & Noble, and I made the comment that I had learned that when someone had trouble letting go of stuff, if I ask enough questions, I would always find out that there was a severe emotional loss in their life. And this young man, he was probably in his mid-20s, came up to me and he said, my apartment is so full of papers. I have not had anybody in for months, including my family. He said, I come home from work at night and I say, okay, tonight is the night I'm going to clean this up. And he said, I pick up the pieces of paper, and he said, I literally become physically paralyzed. And he said, the biggest flat surface I have in my studio apartment is my bed. And he said, I start sorting on the bed. And he said, there are nights when I literally crawl into bed beside with my pieces of paper. And then he looked at me and he said, my mother died when I was 6 years old. Are you telling me that I have to deal with the grief of losing my mother before I can handle my paper? I answered him. I said, well, I'm not a mental health professional, so I can't answer that. But what I can tell you from my experience is that if you find someone you trust, probably not a family member, who can help you decide what you need and want to keep, you will solve your paper problem, and it will impact your other emotions as well. Well, I was speaking to a group of executive women at a university, and I told that story, and a woman walked up to me and she said, you just saved my marriage. I said, wow, that's pretty dramatic. What do you mean? She said, I came here with the intention of going home and telling my husband, to whom I've been married for 13 years, that I was leaving. Because she said, he's a pack rat, keeps everything. I have allergies. I can't keep the house clean. She said, but I never realized until I heard you that it wasn't that he wouldn't let go, but that he couldn't. And literally the tears came down her eyes, and she said, his mother died when he was 7. And she said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm willing to go back and give it a try now that I understand that. So I said, may I make a suggestion? She said, of course. I said, if you go back and say something to him to the effect of, I never understood before how important all this is to you. Let's figure out how you can keep it and we can still live together. I stayed in touch with her for probably 6 to 8 months, and there were amazing results. Now, it took 13 years, so there was, it wasn't like it was all gone, but it changed everything, because what happens, God has a sense of humor. In most marriages, there's a keeper and a thrower away. I mean, I'm in one of those, like that's just the way it works. The more you say to someone else, you don't need that, the more they hang on, because they don't feel heard. And so when she said to him, I never understood how important this was, then it changed the dynamics. And then he began to say, well, we had collections, like, okay, well, we can take a picture of this collection and then I'll be willing to let it go. It was absolutely amazing. So every time I'm working with a client, I'm listening for the emotion that's behind it, because there's always some emotion behind it. And a lot of people, I call myself Vision Accelerator, which simply means that a lot of people, that's the legacy you want to leave. We live in a culture where we saved our china and crystal and furniture and artwork and whatever for our children and our grandchildren, and they don't want it. And that brings up a whole emotional issue about, what does that say about me? What does that say about my life? And if that isn't my legacy, then what is? And so we began to look at what have they done in their life that was important and meaningful, and then began to look at what's really important and what could be a real legacy. And Stephan, often it ends up being their story. And I've helped several people launch writing a book, because that is a legacy that will last long after they're gone.
Yes, absolutely. So what's your take on storage units? That might be a way to get stuff out of the house so it's not kicking up dust and creating allergies for the other partner, but that doesn't feel like a long-term solution.
No, it's not. It can be a temporary solution, but it is not a long-term solution. If we go back to companies, the amount of money that companies are wasting in storing things in storage units that they never, ever look at is astronomical. So the decision making is the key. And how do you make the decisions? So we have some questions we ask people. One of our questions is, does this, whatever this is, this could be a piece of paper, it could be a file, it could be a digital document, it could be a notebook, it could be a piece of furniture, a piece of equipment. Does this help me accomplish my work or enjoy my life? If it doesn't, by definition, it is clutter. And your ability to accomplish any task or goal is directly related to your ability to find what you need when you need it. And when you have a whole lot of stuff that you haven't been able to find. So in storage units, for example, the majority of people have no ideas what theirs because they don't remember. So if you're going to use a storage unit, there may be, maybe you have children who are in school right now and you think someday down the road they might want it, or maybe you're a company and you're in the midst of some kind of reorganization. There are times, but make sure you inventory what goes there so that you know what's there. So you don't have to go dig through it in order to find what it is that you need.
Yeah. What does that look like? An inventory kind of index on a spreadsheet, or how do you recommend keeping track of that?
Well, thanks for that question, because that's the key. So the secret sauce, I mentioned to you earlier that we call it a finding system, not a filing system. And it came about because when Taming the Paper Tiger came out, I was approached by a software company. At this point, it was in 92. And the gentleman who owned it said, I've read all the organizing books. Yours is the best, and we can turn it into software. I had no clue what he meant. I mean, not a clue, but I'm always up for an adventure. So 48 hours later, he drove from Atlanta, or flew from Atlanta. I was in Raleigh, and we sat down for 4 hours. And in my book, in Taming the Paper Tiger, I had written about that I used with my clients a file index. And I said, a file index is to a filing system what a chart of accounts is to accounting. You can't manage your money if you don't have a chart of accounts. Well, that's what happens with a file, because the same information can be filed under automobile, car, Chrysler, transportation, or vehicle. And if two people are using the same file, there's no way you're going to use the same words. And we don't even remember what we called it. We called it this one time, and then 3 weeks later, we forgot that that's what we called it. And automobiles in the top drawer and vehicles in the bottom drawer. And so we end up making a new system. So we created this finding system where you could index your file. You kept the paper files, but instead of putting names on the file folder, you simply put a number, and that was a warehouse. So you literally created a warehouse for paper. Then you would go to your computer, and we then had Taming the Paper Tiger software, which still exists. I'm no longer part of that company, and we use other things now. But you can use the computer then to index your papers. So you're creating a Google search for your physical things. And that's what you would do to the warehouse. So for example, years ago, I had a client who was a foundry. He had a foundry in West Virginia, 12 employees. They were going to put in an inventory system, and it was going to be $25,000. He said, I can't invest that much. Well, at that point, I had my software. I went in, I spent 2 days. I installed the inventory for them, trained all their employees for $10,000, and they used it for 10 years. So the key is simplicity. People often try to do things so much more complex than needs to be.
I love simplicity, and I struggle with maintaining structure in my digital filing and all that. It just like I'll have tons of tabs open on my browser, tons of files on my desktop. I know that means I'm a creative, and I'm very creative, but it also occupies space in my head. It doesn't feel good. Go into my to-do list, 6,000 items in there.
Yeah, well, that's in our digital transformation boot camp. That's one of the things. And the thing about these boot camps are people are actually organizing while we're there. It isn't taking a class and then it's like, oh, now I know what to do. I have to go do it. They actually are on the class doing it with other people. And one of the side effects that we found about that is, there's a lot of shame involved with disorganization and clutter. because people think, I'm smart, I'm creative, why do I have such a mess? And interestingly enough, if you Google clutters, postponed decisions, you will see me quoted often. But unfortunately, they often add an adverb, and it will say clutter is only postponed decisions, or merely postponed decisions, or simply postponed decisions. Well, if you're having trouble making decisions about where to keep something, or what to call it, or how to find it, and then you hear somebody say, oh, it's just postponed decisions, how does that make you feel? It's like, oh man. So there's more shame piled onto that. It's like, I should be able to do this myself. I'm a smart person. Why am I struggling so much with this? And so our goal is to teach people how to make decisions, and it doesn't have a right. Hemphill's principle is you can keep everything you want if you can find it. And we say the cost factor, you can keep everything you want if you're willing to pay the price, which is time, space, money, and to your point, energy. If you're looking at that computer screen and there's 50,000 things open, then that's draining your energy. And so it's about simplicity. So in our boot camps, we're making things very simple. I'll give you one example. So paper, there's literally, and we encourage people to start with paper first, because the principles you learn with paper apply everywhere else. But because paper is tactile, you're also learning kinesthetically. So it increases the way you learn. With a piece of paper, there are only 3 decisions: file, act, or toss. File means, I don't know if I'll ever need it, but I don't have the guts to throw it away. So I'm going to put it in my finding system, which means if I ever need it, I'll be able to find it. Act means the ball is in my court. So then the question becomes, what is the next action? Part of the reason that people get so overwhelmed is they look at a piece of paper and it's like, well, I need to do this and this and this and this, and they can't figure out what to do. So they pick it up and put it from the left side of the desk into the right side of the desk. But if they ask the question, what's the next action and when, then we help them implement a system so that they don't have to touch that piece of paper until they're ready to do it again. So you have file, you have act, or you have toss. And for toss, we have the Art of Waste Basketry, which is, what's the worst possible thing that would happen if I threw this away or deleted it? If I threw this away or I deleted it, what could potentially happen? And then you say, is that a price I'm willing to pay? And it's not a moral issue. 30 years ago, I had a PR firm in Atlanta that had 35,000 reference files and 2 full-time employees and a room with those file cabinets that you rolled from side to side. Was it necessary? No. But it was necessary from the owner because the owner had huge emotional issues about letting go of things and missing out on opportunities and taking care of other people. In fact, this is where I joke. I came up with the idea, the word archives, ARCHIVES. To my clients, I say it should be spelled our, OUR, chives. Because in the case of this PR company, what was happening was they were saving their clients' stuff for years. And so then a past client would call and say, 10 years ago, you did such and such for us. And before we put our finding system in, the poor employees would be digging through this conference room with these boxes trying to find this file, which was a complete waste of time. So we did 2 things. One was we implemented a thing that at the end of 90 days, they would send something to the client and say, we have such and such of yours. If we don't hear from you within 30 days, it'll be destroyed. Well, that actually increased the number of clients they had because it raised people's, we're working on this project and I bet this company could help me. And the employees didn't have to go back digging through the things. But we did spend a long time filing a lot of that because they weren't willing to take the emotional risk of letting it go. And you have to go through the emotion. That's the thing that's, you will get through it, but it feels uncomfortable. And if you're always comfortable, you're never going to grow. So if you want to deal with the clutter in your life, you need to be willing to go through the emotion and the discomfort to get on the other side. And I've never had anybody come back and say, I'm sorry I did this. Never. Now, I always tell people, as we do this, I go into companies and I say, okay, I guarantee you that you're going to get rid of something that a week from now, a decade from now, you'll say, I wish I had such and such. but you have to remember what the price was that you were paying to keep it. So if you ask yourself what we call the art of waste basketry question is, what's the worst thing that would happen? Then you say, is that a price I'm willing to pay? And it's not a moral issue. And two people can answer the same thing. So employees, right? Two employees could say the worst thing that would happen is if I threw it away and my boss wanted it, he'd yell at me. And one would say, yeah, he'll get over it, throw it away. And the other one would say, I don't want him to, keep it. That isn't right or wrong. That's difference. That's the art. That's what will you do?
This is good stuff. So one bit of wisdom I learned from Kabbalah is that all loss is illusion. So if we are attached to an object, some sort of heirloom or piece of paper or file or whatever, then we end up tossing it or donating it or whatever. That idea of loss is illusion. The only thing that's real here is love. And if you can really get behind that, then you don't have the emotional pull to keep all this stuff. I've really gone through quite a transformation. By part of my kind of spiritual awakening has helped me to let go of some of the attachment to these physical items, because I know that it's not real. Like none of this physicality it is just part of the video game that we're playing called life. If I wanted to reminisce over something, that nostalgic event or item or something, I could transport myself to that point in this video game later on once I'm, back in the heavens. But probably I wouldn't need to, because, I moved on.
Oh, it's so true. Oh, I love that. All loss. That's so true. I mean, that's truth. I mean, that is truth with a capital T. When we keep all this stuff because of the past, it's preventing us from being all that God intended us to be. I believe that all of us were created for very specific, very unique things that only we can do. There is literally no one else created to do exactly what we were created to do. And our legacy is doing that. And by hanging on to the clutter of the past, we are holding ourselves back, and we're denying the world of the blessing that we would give them by enabling them. So our Productive Environment Institute says, accomplish your work and enjoy your life, and enable others to do the same. Because when you're accomplishing your work and enjoying your life, you are enabling other people. You're being a role model to people. You're helping people that desperately need your help. And one of the values of our company is together we are better. In our society, often it's like, oh, I'm strong. I need to do this myself. I shouldn't ask for help. I mean, you use the example of having your assistant go through your email. I mean, if you're going through your email, you are, first of all, you're depriving somebody else of employment, because there's somebody else who would love to have that as a job. You're depriving your clients and your friends and all the people of being all that you can be, because you're bogged down in all of that email. Email is the biggest productivity drain ever. And you know what's interesting about it, Stephan? Why that happened? We talked earlier about how we've never been taught to be organized. Well, email is a good example of that. Because when email was introduced into companies, hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on installing the software, the platform, virtually none on how to use it. And I remember one of the biggest contracts I ever had was with an international company. It was called Taming the Email Tiger. And at that point, they used Lotus Notes. And I couldn't even use it because that was a proprietary program that I didn't have access to. I couldn't even use it. So I needed to go in and teach. These were sales reps. So I was going to the sales training people all around the country. I went to Barnes & Noble and I bought Lotus Notes for Dummies. And I built it because 80% of what I presented had nothing to do with the software itself. It had to do with the decision making. It had to do with putting systems in place. And then the little bit that I needed to know, I could find out from Lotus Notes for Dummies. It was the most popular thing I've ever done. And it was all men, mostly middle-aged men who, they'd never been taught anything like that. And they loved it. They didn't know the simplest things, like they didn't know that you could set up a rule so that an email that they got from somebody who was annoying as hell, they could put in automatically into a folder so they didn't have to look at it. But if that person wanted to talk to them, they could pull it up. It's like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. I mean, just things like that they really loved. So one of our other principles is half of any job is using the right tool. My daddy on the farm used to say half of any job is having the right tool. And I changed it. No, it's not having it. It's using it. And a lot of people, email's a good example. The help tab in your email is one of the best tools because there's answers there to problems that you can solve that people just don't even know it's there and have never thought to look at it.
An analogy that comes to mind when you're talking about holding on to clutter, the deferred decision making, and how this is an energy drain and a block. This analogy of Tarzan swinging from vine to vine, and if he doesn't let go of the one vine, he can't grab onto the next one.
It's so true. That's a great analogy. I'll often use that one because that's very visual. It's so true.
Yeah. And that also has to do with this idea of postponing your prosperity by holding on to the clutter. By holding on and not decluttering and not just letting go.
Oh, I love that. I just wrote that down. Postponing your prosperity. Boy, that sounds like a blog talk if there ever was. I love it.
It could be a book.
It would. Absolutely.
Yeah. Postpone Prosperity by Barbara Hemphill. I like it.
I love that. Oh my, and it is true. That's exactly what happens. Exactly.
Yeah. And another thing too, kind of a corollary to that is a lot of folks, me included, have FOMO, fear of missing out. And I recently learned from watching a video on YouTube with Bashar, B-A-S-H-A-R, who is channeled by Daryl Anka. You know, it's kind of like how Abraham is channeled by Esther Hicks. Well, Bashar is channeled by Daryl Anka. Pretty woo-woo, I know, but really amazing wisdom being channeled through Daryl. And this idea of FOMO actually creating the missing out was really profound for me. So FOMO is fear of missing out. And I read somewhere else, The Game of Life and How to Play It by Florence Scovel Shinn. It's a 100-year-old book, amazing book. She defines fear as inverse faith. So it's faith that the other shoe will drop. You know, it's faith that everything like Murphy's Law is going to happen, right? So FOMO is fear, that inverse faith that you're going to miss out. And of course, you've manifested that reality. You've created the missing out. Missing out does not happen normally because everything is divinely orchestrated and perfect and designed for your highest and best good. Except if you've got FOMO, then you've ordered up from the universe some missing out so that you can have fear of it.
And that is, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is also the reason that people save so much more than they need to save. Like reference files is a good example. I mean, the reason that client had 35,000 reference files because it was a fear of missing out on someone. Another really big one is a fear of offending someone. So this was given to me. So for example, when I autograph books now, I no longer autograph them to an individual unless I'm asked to. Because one of the biggest challenges in entrepreneurs' offices is their library. And one of the things I learned was that if the books were autographed with their name, they were reluctant to let go of them because it felt disrespectful. It's like, this was written to me. It has my name in it. And if I let go of it, I'm being disrespectful. So now when I autograph books, I write blessings, Barbara Hemphill. And then I say to them, because what would happen then was it became clutter for the client. The client really didn't want it anymore, but they didn't know what to do with it. And as an author, the book got stuck there. Whereas if I just autograph it generically, then they can pass it on to somebody else. So someone else will get blessed by the information that they read.
Yeah, I like that. You know, I just have been going through a bunch of old books, like boxes and boxes of old books that I pulled out from the storage unit, and we're trying to clear out the storage unit. And one of the books that was hard for me to get rid of, but I did end up putting it in the donate pile, is this tiny little book. It's got a little author inscription in there in the front. to Stephan Spencer, whatever, thank you for everything. Jimmy Carter. It was his
Ah,
Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech as a little book. And then, cause I did a lot of like SEO and things for the Carter Center back years and years ago. That was a little thank you I got. And I just put it in the donate pile because I don't need that. It doesn't spark joy, to use the term from Marie Kondo.
right.
And, I think highly of Jimmy Carter, and I don't need the book.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's so true. And people really, really struggle with that, letting go of things that might offend somebody or might be important or something. But then it's holding you back. It is postponing your prosperity. It's postponing your peace. I remember years ago, I had a client where all of her children had left home and left behind all their stuff. And so this was back when I was doing residences. So we went in, we told all the children, you have 90 days to get anything out of here you want. Whatever you don't want in 90 days, if you haven't taken it, then we're going to do with it whatever we want. So we did. One child was overseas, so we put his there saying, because he was going to come back, but the rest of them we did. And she called me, I don't know, about 6 weeks later, and she says, this is going to sound really crazy, but since we organized that attic, I sleep better at night. Well, it didn't sound, because the attic was literally over the master bedroom. And if you look at Feng Shui technology, it's like philosophy, literally that was hanging over her head. And I've had that happen. And just this week, I actually talked with a client who was really struggling with some stuff. And we found out that her house had furniture in it that she had bought with her first husband. That was a very, very unhappy marriage. And she never made the connection. I never understood. And where it came about was sometimes we have people take a picture of stuff. Like when you look at your own stuff, it's hard to see it. But if you take a picture of it and then you look at the picture, it's kind of like you're looking at it with different eyes. And she had these bookshelves that had been custom made with her husband 35 years ago, full of the bookshelves themselves and full of books that she really didn't care about. And it came up because in the garage, she had a drafting table. And I said, well, is that she wanted to use for artwork? And I said, is there room in the house? And she said, well, there would be if I took the bookshelves out. And then that was when she told me the history of the bookshelves. And I said, there's what's causing the clutter. That's the emotion that's causing the clutter. And her face literally just lit up. I mean, she's, oh, I'm so excited. I never made that connection before. And so her next assignment was to literally walk through the house and look at all the things that were there that were related to that previous marriage, which was full of unhappiness.
Wow. Yeah, that really you made a difference in her life. Amazing. Yeah. So you mentioned Feng Shui. Do you know who Marie Diamond is?
Yes, I do. Yeah. I mean, I know of her, but I'm...
Yeah, so I heard her talk about Feng Shui as it relates to abundance, prosperity. And there's a success corner. It's different for each person. There's, like a relationship corner and so forth. And you figure out where those corners are. And if you're facing, your desk is facing the wrong direction, that's holding back your prosperity. It was really fascinating. And she spoke at a Mind Valley summit. And Vishen Lakhiani, the founder of Mind Valley, said that he actually tried implementing these things that Marie recommended, and that included turning his desk, making a shift in direction for his desk, and it made a huge difference. The sales really increased right after that. Just a whole bunch of things happened for him that made it very clear that this was not just hocus pocus.
Oh, it's absolutely true. I have used Feng Shui consultants myself. It's one of those things that I found you have to be very careful with, because it's one of those things that there are some foundational truths that I think are fit with virtually any philosophy. But then some of them get into some things that I just don't buy. I mean, it's just stuff that doesn't fit in with my philosophy of life. So you have to be very discerning. But when we're helping people organize their office, one of the first things we look at is where is their chair sitting? When they're sitting at their desk, it's got to be the power position. And if it isn't, then there are some ways that you can work around it. But it has to do, a way I think of describing it, it has to do with the way that light and air flows. So it's when things are not arranged properly, it ends up being clutter because it's not doing what it needs to do. So we always take that into consideration. When I mentioned that we had the year-long program, which we call SOAR, it's systemize, organize, activate, and relate. So that has to do with relationships, that's when we begin to look at, okay, is your office organized the right way? And I actually had a Feng Shui consultant. I used to have an office upstairs, and I had several employees here, and it was really a big office and had fancy furniture in and everything. She said, what do you think about your office? And I said, well, it works. And she looked at me and she said, that's the problem. I said, what do you mean? She said, you're working too hard. And she said, I feel like you should flip offices. And so we did. I flipped downstairs to a smaller office, and I did something I'd never done before. I'd always organized my office based on function. And this time I did it on aesthetics. And it was partly because I'm in a different stage in my life. And I think that's one of the things that's really important also, is that organized is different depending on where you are in life. So we have 4 questions that we use to say whether something's organized. It's, does it work? Do you like it? Does it work for the people it impacts? And can you recover quickly? Can you recover quickly means, yeah, messes happen, but I know what to do with it. It's when a mess happens, you know what to do with it. That's a problem. But if you know what to do with it, but then 6 months later, you ask, does it still work? Do I still like it? Does it still work for the people it impacts? And can I still recover quickly? If the answer is no, it doesn't mean you were wrong 6 months ago. It means things have changed. And I still take a few clients, not very many. And people say, well, why would you still do clients? I said, because things change so quickly, it's important that I take some clients so that I know that everything we're teaching still works, that we're able to adapt. And we've constantly adapt. The foundations have been the same. In fact, I was clearing out some of my memorabilia, and I found an audio cassette that I did of a speech I gave to Bloomingdale's in New York City in 1988. And I listened to it. It was so funny. First of all, I talked at a record pace. So it was like, okay, I've only got an hour. I've got to tell them everything I know. So that was really funny. But it was still clutter's postponed decisions. It was still, there's only 3 pieces of paper. And I have to joke because I will say to my husband, oh, I'm giving a speech for such and such. And he says, what's your topic? And I said, we've been married for 37 years and I'm still talking about the same thing. It hasn't changed.
Well, there are a lot of people that you still have to help.
Well, we're a society. I mean, as a culture, we have a clutter crisis as a culture. And the storage unit that you brought up is a good example of that. And I was autographing books at a bookstore in Chapel Hill one day, and there were 4 women sitting on the front row. They were all living in 4,000 plus square foot houses by themselves. And they wanted to move, but what was preventing them was, what do I do with all the stuff? Because in this case, it was their children and grandchildren didn't want it. So it's like, what am I going to do with that stuff? So they're miserable, really. I mean, they didn't have relationships with people. They were stuck in their stuff. And unfortunately, there are thousands of people in that position. And there are many entrepreneurs that could be making so much more money if they put systems in place that they could delegate. A lot of people are not organized enough to be able to delegate. Mm-hmm. And so I love James Clear in Atomic Habits. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And so we are all about helping clients put in systems that they will do or that they can delegate.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have a scorecard to help people to see where they're at in terms of what they need to focus on and where their weak points are. What's that scorecard?
Well, it's fun. We all like to measure ourselves. That's why when you're at the checkout stand at the grocery store, there are always quizzes, right? It's productiveenvironmentscore.com. When you go there, you'll fill out, it might take you 5 minutes, not long, it's 15 questions that talks about how you work, how you manage your email, and just different things like that. We've looked at thousands of those. So when we look at them, we can very quickly tell how you need to get started. So when you fill it out, you will get a total office transformation blueprint, which is actually a picture of how you organize your office. And then you'll have the opportunity to have a 30-minute consultation with one of our certified productive environment specialists to customize it for you. A lot of people end up doing a lot of things that are really a waste of time. For example, they're dealing with the old stuff instead of putting a system in place first. If they put a system in place first, then they'll get a lot more. So you get that consultation to point you in the right direction. And we're also always looking for people who are interested in a career change to become a certified productive environment specialist. We have a website, becomeaspecialist.com, and you can go there and listen to that webinar. It talks about how it works, and it's a great way so that entrepreneurs can get a new source of income. Sometimes there are people who already have a coaching program and they can add this to it, or somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur but doesn't know how. So
awesome. All right. Well, we'll include those links in the show notes for this episode. So if we could leave our listener or viewer with one last wisdom nugget, something that you haven't already shared, what would it be?
One of the questions that I encourage everyone to ask, and I ask myself that question periodically, was, if you left this earth tonight, what regrets would you have? The answer to that question is a form of clutter. And so then it is time to do something about that. So you mentioned taking nonviolent communication. I took that, I answered that question, and my answer was, there was one of my adopted children that I didn't have a very good relationship with. And I realized that would be my regret. And I was saying, oh, but I can't do anything about it because I reached out and she doesn't reach back. And when I took that course, it's like, oh, yes, I can. So I made an intention. That was in January, a year ago, January. I made an intention that if we had not connected by Mother's Day, I would get on an airplane and fly and show up on her doorstep. Well, I didn't have to. A few months later, we began to text, and then she came to visit me. So do not underestimate the difference that you can make in your life. And when you ask that question, what regret would I have if I left this earth tonight? Then it's time to do something about it. And I'm the connector. So often when people come to me to answer that, I'm not doing the work, but I'm connecting them with the person that can help them solve that problem.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Barbara. What a pleasure, and really inspiring. You're doing such good in the world. Thank you for everything that you do and the light that you reveal.
Thank you, Stephan.
And listener, you too are a light in the world. Get out there and make a difference. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host. In the meantime, have a great week. Stephan Spencer signing off.